Your fantasy football draft is almost here, and maybe you already know you have an early pick, picks 1 through 4, or maybe you don't know where you're picking yet, and you just want to make sure you're as prepared as possible. Well, either way, I got you covered because I'm going to break down exactly how I would draft if I had a top 4 pick in fantasy football this year, and I'm using the ADP off the major sites, ESPN, Yahoo, and Sleeper, and I'm bringing you the most likely players that you can get in this range when you're on the clock. So let's get into it and make sure you draft an incredible team from that early spot. All right, let's start in round 1, and I think there's a couple ways you can go here, and you can either go with one of the elite running backs or one of the elite wide receivers. Ha, I know, right? I'm already dropping knowledge on you. Wow, Chris, thanks. A running back or a wide receiver, like, so helpful. But here's what I mean by that. There are parts in the draft, like if you have a middle pick or a late pick, I may not be going running back depending on who's on the board. But here, you can go ahead. Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. I think any of these guys are worth a top 4 pick. So if you're more comfortable taking a running back with your first pick, grab one of those guys. You'll be fine. Now, if you're like, hey, I don't know, I don't want to risk it with a running back. They're always getting hurt. I hear you. I understand. Go with one of the wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. Any one of those guys will be great for your fantasy team as a top 4 pick. So pick your poison. You want a running back, you want a wide receiver. Either way, you should be good. Now, when we get towards the end of round 2 and early into round 3, there's different ways you can go here. If you didn't go running back in round 1 and you want to go running back here, or maybe you did go running back in round 1 and you're like, hey, I want to go robust RB. I like as many running backs as possible. I'm fine with Isaiah Pacheco or Devon Achane here. Now, I'd prefer it if these guys fell to the 3rd round. You know, if it's late enough in the 2nd round, I'm okay with these guys. I like both of them. I think both of them have RB1 potential. Now, if you went running back in the 1st round and you want to go wide receiver here, or maybe you want to go wide receiver, there's definitely some guys I like at this spot here. I like Chris Olave, Drake London, Mike Evans, Nico Collins, the 2 49ers wide receivers, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. These are the guys you're going to normally see around this range that I would be targeting at the wide receiver position on most of these sites. Now, when we get to the picks at the end of round 4, leading into round 5, I think these are some of the most crucial picks because we know those guys in the first 3 rounds, they're all pretty much studs. We know who they are. We know what we're getting with those guys. But here you got some guys we maybe don't know what we're getting, but also more importantly, this is really going to determine how the rest of your draft goes, how your fantasy team is built. The players you pick in these rounds is going to have a major impact on the players you pick in the rest of the rounds. Now, let me start by saying, if you get to this spot and you really need a running back, maybe you went 4 straight wide receivers, or maybe you only have 1 running back and you're freaking out, the only guy in this range that I'm really willing to take is Kenneth Walker. I think Kenneth Walker is being slept on this year. There's talks from the coaches that this guy is going to be a 3-down back. He's going to be used in the passing game. If that's true, that is going to unleash the full potential of Kenneth Walker. But if I don't need a running back here, or like Kenneth Walker's gone, I'm probably just going to pass on running back in these rounds. At wide receiver, you're going to see guys like DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Devonta Smith, Amari Cooper, Zay Flowers. I'd be fine with any of these guys. You could take one of them. You could take 2 of them. Whatever you want to do here, I'd be fine with any of these guys as wide receivers. I think they all have tremendous upside and potential in 2024. Now, this is where you can also start to think about like elite tight end, elite QB. So at tight end, you're going to find guys like Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid. If I'm going elite early tight end, these are the guys I want. I want those guys kind of like in that 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 tight end range. I don't want to be the first one to draft a tight end. I want the first tight end off the board. I kind of want those like mid elite guys, if that makes sense. And these are them, and they're all tremendous values. They all have tremendous upside. So if you don't want to wait on tight end, these are the guys I would target here. And if you don't want to wait on quarterback, you can oftentimes get Anthony Richardson in this range. This is a guy who has top 5 QB potential. Sure, there's risk. He's a running quarterback, but you know what? Sometimes you got to take that risk. If he stays healthy all year, he could lead you to a fantasy championship. So this is what I mean by you have some choices in these 2 rounds here. Like, do you take an elite early tight end? Do you take an elite QB? I will say, me personally, I'm not taking both. Like if I'm going to take a tight end, I'm probably going to wait on QB or vice versa. But really, a lot of ways you can go here, and it's going to impact the rest of your draft. Now, when you get to round 6 to 7, what you're going to find in these ranges is there's a lot of running backs you're going to be like, you know, I don't mind that guy as my RB2. So that's why I'm not so like into forcing my RB2 early. I just feel like there's a lot of good RB2 value in round 6 to say like 8 or 9 in drafts this year. I mean, here you can find guys like Ramondre Stevenson, Zamir White, Raheem Mostert, Najee Harris. No, they're not the most exciting names, but they're all going to be probably workhorse running backs in their offenses. They all have potential upside. They've got decent enough floors. They're safe enough. So again, I don't feel like I have to force one of those RB2s into my lineup because I can just wait. And as you'll see in the rounds 8 and 9, there's even other guys that you'll actually probably be pretty comfortable with at the running back position. Now, wide receiver, it gets a little more slim. Now, there are guys here like Terry McLaurin that I really like, Chris Godwin, Christian Kirk, but that's really about it, which is, again, why I don't want to feel like I have to force 2 running backs in. Like, I have to force a tight end and a QB because you get to this range here and you look at the board and you're like, wow, there's a lot of running backs I like and not that many wide receivers. So it almost makes sense to go wide receiver a little heavier early and then hit tight end, running back, and QB a little bit later. But if you're in this spot and you need a wide receiver, look for those guys. And if you get to this spot without a tight end and you don't really want to wait much longer, Evan Ingram is a great value here. You can often get him in this range in your fantasy drafts. This guy's been one of the best tight ends 2 years in a row. I don't think that's going to change. So if you didn't get one of those elite early ones, Evan Ingram is fine here. And if you didn't get Anthony Richardson or an elite early QB, you could find guys here like Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, guys that have tremendous upside in fantasy, but you get them much later in the draft, so you're able to build out those other positions like running back, like wide receiver, like tight end. So don't feel like you have to force early elite QB. There are also lots of great QB value, even if you're drafting early in one of the first 4 picks. Do you want to win your fantasy league but don't have time to do all the research? Are you tired of drafting mediocre teams and then having to constantly hope you hit it big on the waiver wire just to compete? Do you wish you could have a fantasy expert like Pierre or myself with you while you draft? Well, now you can. With our app Draft Lane and our live draft pilot, we will guide you through every pick of your draft and tell you exactly which players we would pick if we were on the clock. Our proprietary algorithm will take into account your league settings, scoring, and roster requirements to identify the best picks every time you are on the clock to ensure you have a winning team from week 1. It's the closest thing you can get to having us there drafting with you. Get the biggest edge in fantasy football. Just go to your app store and search for Draft Lane and download it today and get ready to dominate your draft. Now, when we get to rounds 8 to 9, I told you there's a lot of running backs here. I mean, you got Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson Jr., Tyjae Spears. I mean, these are guys that I would totally be comfortable having as my RB2, maybe even my RB3 at this point. These are guys that you can plug into your lineup at any given week, and you're probably going to feel okay about it. And again, we're in rounds 8, round 9, so no reason to force in that RB2 early in your draft. Now, there are some better options here at wide receiver, but it's still kind of slim. I mean, you're looking at 2 of the Chiefs wide receivers like Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy. I'm still okay with Hollywood Brown, but if you don't want to deal with the, missing the potential first few weeks, Xavier Worthy should be fine too. There's Christian Watson here. There's Jackson Smith-Njigba here. I mean, we're talking about guys with upside but risk as well. Again, why I don't want to have to get to this spot needing like my wide receiver 3 or needing a flex play. I'd rather have that locked in already early with guys I feel better about. Now, when we get to rounds 10 and 11, obviously here are going to be a lot of dart throws, but there still are some guys I really like a running back, Chase Brown, Jerome Ford, who's probably going to be the RB1 in Cleveland for most, if not all of the season. At wide receiver, you got guys like Courtland Sutton. Yeah, he's not exciting, but he's going to be the wide receiver 1 here. Bo Nix looks pretty good. He's got touchdown upside. Brian Thomas Jr., who's actually been impressing in camp, he's got upside. I mean, we're in rounds 10 and 11. You got to take some risks. Jameson Williams with the Detroit Lions, again, potential but risk. Like, we're in this kind of range here. And if you haven't gotten a QB yet and you like, hey, I don't want to wait any longer, I don't mind Caleb Williams here. I think Caleb Williams could be this year's CJ Stroud, the rookie quarterback who's mostly great this year. He's got so many weapons around him, a great offensive line. He's a phenomenal player. So if you've waited on QB this long, don't be afraid to take Caleb Williams. Now, when we get to rounds 12 to 13, if you have not taken tight end yet, if you're just punting tight end, which I think is definitely a viable strategy, you can still find guys like Cole Kmet, Luke Musgrave here, who I think are going to be fine as like an every week tight end. Like, sure, they're going to be a little more volatile than some of the other tight ends, but really all tight ends are pretty volatile for the most part. And then at QB, if you just absolutely punt at QB, it's fine this year. You can find guys like Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford in this range. Like, no, they don't have the ceilings of like Josh Allen's or Jalen Hurts or Anthony Richardson's, but you're getting them way later in the draft, so they're good enough for your fantasy team if you punted QB. And then, of course, filling out the bench, I'd be looking at guys like Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle at running back. Again, I think these guys can be the RB1 for their fantasy teams to start the season, can help you like in a pinch and maybe all year long. We'll see. Or a wide receiver, you got guys like Romeo Doubs, Brandon Cooks, Josh Palmer. Again, guys like, now they're not super exciting, but you need to put them in your fantasy lineup. It's not the worst thing in the world here. We're talking about the last couple picks anyways. And then finally, I need to say this. If you're in a league that has kicker and defense, please don't pick a kicker or defense before the last 2 rounds. I know you think having Justin Tucker is an advantage, or having that kicker from Dallas last year is an advantage, even though he'll probably go out there and miss like 10 kicks this year and kill your fantasy team. Just don't do it. There's not that big of a gap between the best kicker and like a middling kicker. And same with defense. You can just stream defenses against terrible offenses. You don't need to waste an early pick on a kicker or defense. Let your other league mates waste picks on kickers and defense early. So there you go. There's my blueprint. If I'm picking early picks 1 through 4 in fantasy football this year, go ahead and use it in your fantasy drafts. And also go ahead and don't miss this video here where we break down 8 league winners you need to try to get if at all possible.